It was just another ordinary day on the highway. Or so it seemed. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the road as the steady hum of cars filled the air. But then, a piercing screech shattered the mundane rhythm of the afternoon. A sleek black luxury car barreled down the highway, swerving erratically. Was the driver distracted? As the vehicle crossed the median into oncoming traffic, a collective gasp rose from horrified onlookers. The inevitable came swiftly, a deafening crash as metal met metal in a devastating collision with an oncoming truck. The sound was gut-wrenching, a cacophony of crunching steel and shattering glass. Time seemed to stand still for a moment as the dust settled. The car, once a symbol of wealth and power, was now a mangled heap, unrecognizable under the weight of destruction. The air smelled of burnt rubber and gasoline, a cocktail of danger that sent chills down the spine. Inside the car lay its occupant, a CEO renowned for his shrewd business acumen, slumped against the deflated airbag unconscious. Blood trickled from a deep gash on his forehead, painting a grim picture of the peril he was in. On the opposite side of the road, a teenager in an old sedan witnessed it all unfold. Their knuckles whitened as they gripped the steering wheel. "Oh my God! Did that just happen?" they whispered, their voice barely audible over the pounding of their heart. Pulling over, the teenager stared at the wreckage. Smoke billowed from the crumpled car, and a small flame flickered ominously near the engine. Fear clawed at them, whispering to stay put. But another voice, louder and more insistent, roared within. "You have to help. You can't just sit here." Adrenaline surged as they bolted from their car, sprinting toward the scene. Around them, other drivers slowed to a crawl, gawking but not stopping. "Someone call 911, the teenager yelled, their voice breaking through the murmurs of disbelief. As they approached the wreckage, the scale of the devastation hit them like a punch to the gut. Broken glass glinted like shards of ice on the asphalt. Pieces of the car's body were scattered everywhere, twisted into grotesque shapes. The acrid smell of gasoline filled their nostrils, warning of imminent danger. They hesitated, their mind racing. What if the car explodes? What if I make things worse? But then their eyes landed on the man trapped inside, blood staining his shirt. He was barely moving. "I have to do something," they muttered, steeling their resolve. Climbing over the wreckage, they shouted to the man inside, hoping for a response. "Sir, can you hear me?" Nothing. The CEO remained still, his breathing shallow. Panic threatened to take over, but the teenager pushed it aside. The door was jammed shut, the metal warped from the impact. They yanked on it with all their strength, grunting with effort. "Come on, open," they growled. It wouldn't budge. Desperation set in as the fire near the engine grew larger, licking the edges of the hood. A small crowd had gathered at a safe distance, murmuring among themselves, but doing little to help. "Someone bring a fire extinguisher," the teenager shouted, their voice tinged with frustration. A man in a suit called out, "It's too dangerous. Leave it to the professionals." Ignoring the warnings, they turned their focus back to the car. Crawling through the shattered passenger side window, careful not to cut themselves, they reached the man. His face was pale, his breaths faint and labored. "Sir, I'm going to get you out of here," they said, more for their own reassurance than his. Reaching under his arms, they tried to pull him free, but his seatbelt held him in place. "Damn it," they cursed, fumbling for the buckle. The latch was stuck, clogged with debris. Sweat dripped down their forehead as they struggled, the heat from the growing flames adding to the intensity. Behind them, someone finally yelled, "Emergency services are on their way." But the teenager knew they couldn't wait. The fire was spreading fast, the acrid smoke choking the air. "Stay with me, sir," they urged, though the man remained unresponsive. Finally, with a snap, the seatbelt released. "Got it," they exclaimed, relief washing over them. Wrapping their arms around the man, they dragged him through the wreckage, careful to avoid the sharp edges of the twisted metal. Each step felt like an eternity, the weight of the man testing their strength. "Move, move, move," they shouted to the onlookers as they emerged from the wreck. The crowd parted, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief. Just as they reached a safe distance, a loud pop echoed behind them. The fire had reached the engine. Flames erupted, consuming the car in a fiery inferno. The teenager collapsed to their knees, gasping for air. The CEO lay on the ground beside them, his chest rising and falling faintly. Sirens wailed in the distance, signaling the arrival of help. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. "You saved him," a woman from the crowd whispered, her voice filled with astonishment. The teenager didn't respond, their eyes fixed on the unconscious man. All they could think was, "I did what I had to do." Who were these two individuals, destined to cross paths in such a life-altering way? The teenager was an ordinary high school senior, juggling the chaos of adolescence with a heavy dose of responsibility. They lived in a small suburban neighborhood, in a modest house with peeling paint and a yard that their father swore he'd mow next weekend. Life was simple but demanding. Between school, a part-time job at the local diner, and helping their younger siblings with homework, their days were packed. Yet despite the hustle, they always carried a quiet determination, a drive to do the right thing, no matter how small. Raised in a family that valued kindness above all else, the teenager learned early on that helping others wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. "Leave the world a little better than you found it," their mother often said while packing sandwiches for the homeless shelter. Those words echoed in their mind that fateful day on the highway, spurring them to act when others froze. But what about the man they saved? He was the CEO of a multinational conglomerate, a titan in the business world. His face had graced the covers of financial magazines, and his name was synonymous with power and success. Yet behind the polished public image was a man often described as cold and calculating, someone who valued profit margins over personal connections. Colleagues whispered about his infamous temper and his ruthless approach to negotiations. "He doesn't just win deals," one former employee once said. "He annihilates the competition." His private life was no less isolated. Divorced and estranged from his children, the CEO poured every waking moment into his work, as if trying to outrun the ghosts of his past. It's hard to imagine two lives more different. The teenager, full of youthful hope and grounded by a supportive family, versus the CEO, a man hardened by the relentless pursuit of success and the solitude it brought. What could have possibly brought them together? Fate, it seems, had a plan that neither could have predicted. The day of the accident had started like any other for the teenager. They had overslept, as usual, and scarfed down a piece of toast while grabbing their backpack. "Don't forget to pick up milk on your way home," their mom had called out as they dashed to the car. Little did they know, that mundane errand would lead them straight into a situation that would forever alter their course. For the CEO, the day was shaping up to be another relentless grind. Meetings were scheduled back to back, each one more high stakes than the last. He had been driving himself, a rare occurrence, because his assistant was out sick. "Just another day in the trenches," he muttered, adjusting his Bluetooth headset to take yet another call. But then in a split second, everything changed. The teenager couldn't stop replaying the moment they saw the crash in their mind. The sound, the sight. It was all so vivid, like a nightmare they couldn't shake. After the rescue, as they sat trembling on the pavement, they couldn't help but wonder, who is this man? What's his story? Days later, as the CEO recovered in the hospital, he found himself grappling with similar questions. Who was this fearless young person who had risked their life to save his? Lying in a sterile room, hooked up to machines that beeped incessantly, he couldn't stop thinking about them. The rescue wasn't just an act of bravery. It was a mirror held up to his own life. For years, he had prided himself on being invincible, untouchable. And yet, in his moment of greatest vulnerability, it was a complete stranger who had come to his aid. What did this mean for him? For his future? The CEO's world had always been about control, about meticulously planning every detail. But this was chaos, pure and simple. And somehow amidst the wreckage there was clarity. As the days turned into weeks, the teenager tried to move on with their life. School projects and part-time shifts waited for no one, not even heroes. But something was different now. Friends looked at them with a mix of awe and curiosity. "So you're like a celebrity now," one of them teased. Their younger siblings peppered them with questions. "Were you scared? Did the car explode? Are you going to be in the news?" They brushed it off with a shy laugh, but deep down they felt changed. How could they not? They had stared danger in the face and emerged on the other side. But what haunted them most wasn't the crash or the flames. It was the look on the CEO's face when their eyes finally met. It was a mix of gratitude, vulnerability, and something else, something unspoken. The CEO, meanwhile, couldn't let it go. He had spent his life building walls, shielding himself from anything that might make him seem weak. But now, for the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't quite name. Was it humility? Was it a sense of obligation? Whatever it was, it pushed him to make a call that would set a new chapter in motion. And so 2 lives, one rooted in simplicity and the other in excess, began to intertwine. It was a journey neither of them had chosen, but one that would shape them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The smell of burning rubber filled the air, mingling with the metallic tang of gasoline and the acrid smoke rising from the wreckage. Time seemed to stretch, each second dragging like an eternity as the teenager sprinted toward the twisted remains of the car. "Stay calm. Just stay calm," they whispered to themselves, though their pounding heart threatened to drown out all rational thought. As they reached the vehicle, the scene before them was almost too much to process. The front of the luxury sedan was crumpled like an accordion, the engine still hissing and popping, as if crying out in agony. Inside, the CEO sat slumped against the steering wheel, blood trickling down his temple in a slow, ominous stream. His chest rose and fell faintly, but his eyes remained shut, his body unnervingly still. "Hey, can you hear me?" the teenager shouted, their voice cracking with desperation. No response. They hesitated for a split second, their mind racing. What if the car explodes? What if I make things worse? But then they remembered the first rule their dad always drilled into them. If you can help, you do it. No excuses. With a deep breath, they tried the driver's side door, yanking with all their strength. It wouldn't budge. The frame was bent out of shape, trapping the CEO inside. Panic began to creep in. Come on," they muttered, gripping the edge of the window and pulling with everything they had. Still nothing. By now, a small crowd had gathered at a distance, some holding their phones up to record, others shouting conflicting advice. "Get away from the car," someone yelled. "You're gonna get yourself killed." But the teenager blocked it all out. They weren't about to stand by while someone's life hung in the balance. Spotting a large rock nearby, they grabbed it and smashed it against the glass with a loud crack. Shards rained down, cutting into their hands, but they didn't care. Reaching inside, they managed to unlock the door from the inside and wrestled it open with a groan of metal on metal. As they leaned into the car, the CEO stirred slightly, letting out a faint, pained moan. "Sir, I'm here to help," the teenager said, their voice trembling but firm. "I'm going to get you out of here, okay? Stay with me." The CEO's eyes fluttered open for the briefest moment, unfocused and glassy. "Help me," he croaked, his voice barely audible. But getting him out was easier said than done. The dashboard had caved in, pinning his legs in place. The teenager tried pulling him free, but he cried out in agony, his body stiffening. "I know it hurts," they said, tears of frustration welling up. "But you've got to trust me. We don't have much time." In the distance, the sound of sirens wailed, growing louder with every passing second. Help was on the way, but would it get there in time? The teenager knew the fire creeping from the hood wouldn't wait. "I'm going to move the seat back," they said, their voice steady despite the chaos. "It's going to hurt, but it's the only way." The CEO gave a weak nod, his face pale and slick with sweat. Grabbing the lever, they yanked it with all their might, the seat screeching as it inched backward. The CEO let out a guttural scream that sent shivers down their spine. "Almost there," they said, their own hands shaking as they gripped his arms. Finally, with one last pull, the CEO's legs came free. The teenager wrapped their arms around his torso, struggling to lift him out of the seat. "You're heavier than you look," they muttered, trying to inject some levity into the moment. The CEO gave a faint, breathy chuckle before wincing in pain. As they stumbled away from the car, the first flames licked at the interior, consuming the leather seats in seconds. The heat was unbearable, and the teenager could feel their skin prickling as they dragged the CEO a safe distance from the wreckage. Just as they collapsed onto the pavement, the car erupted in a deafening explosion, sending a plume of fire and smoke into the sky. "Whoa!" The teenager gasped, their chest heaving. Turning to the CEO, they asked, "Are you okay? Can you hear me?" The man's eyes fluttered open again, this time more alert. He looked up at his rescuer, his gaze filled with something the teenager couldn't quite place. Gratitude? "Ah, you saved me," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I don't even know your name." "Call me a concerned citizen," the teenager said with a shaky smile, brushing a strand of hair from their sweat-soaked forehead. At that moment, the paramedics arrived, rushing to the CEO's side. One of them turned to the teenager and said, "You did good, kid. Without you, he wouldn't have made it." As they sat there, watching the scene unfold, the weight of what had just happened began to sink in. Their hands were still trembling, their heart racing like it was trying to escape their chest. But beneath the fear and exhaustion was something else, a deep sense of pride. The CEO, strapped onto a stretcher, reached out as they wheeled him toward the ambulance. "Wait," he said, his voice stronger now. "I need to see you again. Please." The teenager nodded, their throat tight with emotion. "We'll see," they said, though they had no idea what the future would hold. As the ambulance doors closed and the sirens faded into the distance, they sat alone on the pavement, staring at the smoldering wreckage. Their life had been ordinary just an hour ago. Now, nothing would ever be the same. The teenager's life was never the same after that fateful day. Their act of bravery sparked opportunities they never dreamed of: scholarships, media interviews, and even mentorship from the very CEO they saved. But beyond the accolades, they carried a profound realization. What defines us isn't what we face, but how we rise to meet it. Would they have acted differently if they knew how dangerous it was? Perhaps. Yet, in that moment, they chose courage over fear, forever intertwining their story with the strangers. What would you do if fate put you in their shoes? Would you be ready?